Learn how to use the Azure Database Migration Service to provide simplified migration and modernization to Azure on this episode of Data Exposed. Hello, everyone. I'm your guest host, Buck Woody, sitting in this week for Anna Hoffman. For today's conversation, we're going to dive into Azure Database Migration Service and learn how it provides a simplified migration and modernization process to Azure. Over the next couple of minutes, you're going to learn how to assess your on-premises SQL Server instances and your databases when migrating to SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. Now, I'd like to introduce Logan and Carlos. Welcome. Logan, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, Buck. Thank you for having us today. It's great being back. My name is Logan Carrington, and I'm a member of the Azure Relational Database Marketing team, focusing on product marketing for SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machines. Excited to be here.
Fantastic. And we've also got Carlos today. Introduce yourself, Carlos.
Hi, Buck. Yeah, happy to be here back again. So my name is Robles. I am a senior product manager in the data modernization team. This team is responsible building the different migration tools our customers use to migrate to Azure.
Fantastic. So Carlos, what is Azure Database Migration Service and what can customers do with accessing the service?
Sure. So Azure Database Migration Service is an Azure service designed to provide a seamless migration experience to our customers. The Azure SQL Migration extension for Azure Data Studio it's powered by the DMS service. But let me share my screen really quick to explain how it works. So everything starts in the on-premises environment, where our customers have to install Azure Data Studio. Within Azure Data Studio, they can install the Azure SQL Migration extension for Azure Data Studio. And what this extension is doing, so the extension will help them to get this simplified experience to understand the migration readiness from the existing environment. Then they can get Azure recommendations and finally migrate on performing an online or offline migration to a different Azure SQL targets we support. And those are Azure SQL MI, SQL Server and Azure SQL VM, which is the topic today, and Azure SQL Database. And that's it. That's how easy customers can install and use the Azure SQL extension migration for Azure Data Studio.
Nice. Logan, what's with the new SKUs for SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines? There's been some new ones out, right?
Yeah, actually, great question, Buck. The SKUs for SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machines have some exciting news. The latest news is the new larger size of EBDS V5 and Premium SSD V2. E96 BDS V5 and E112 ID BDS V5 VMs just went public preview back in October 2022, so not too long ago. Also, Premium SSD V2 is only in limited GA, so I'm kind of considering that new, especially since it will not be widely available to customers until later this year. Adding on to that point, with up to 3 times the increase in VM to disk throughput and IOPS in previous generations, the DEV4 series is actually ideal for large databases and data analytic applications. Also, you now have access to remote storage performance with 120,000 IOPS and 4,000 megabytes per second, which is in relation to throughput, which is offered with and without local temp disk storage. All these exciting latest updates of EBDS V5 and EBDS V5 series virtual machines are also optimizing your virtual machine series with higher remote storage performance. And once again, to make sure this point is clear, this is generally available now. To add on to that, my colleague Pamela Hood, which wrote a great blog, there'll be a link below this video on this exciting update with a 30% better price performance on the new EBDS V5 VM series if a customer is interested in learning more.
Wow, that's awesome. Logan, this is great news in reference to what is new with the EBDS V5 VM series for SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. But what about that premium SSD V2 disk storage?
Yeah, so premium SSD V2 disk storage is, as I said before, is generally available. And here customers are able to have their data intensive workloads improve with low latency and high performance combined with higher IOPS and throughput with lower costs and high durability. Premium SSD V2 disk storage is also flexible with higher performance, which also helps to scale capacity and IOPS meet workload requirements, all which not only reduces costs, has easier maintenance and scaling process than previous disk storage versions. It also highlights in reference to scaling performance up and down without downtime.
Oh, that's just great. Logan, thanks for explaining those latest updates. Now, building on this point, Carlos, how does a customer assess their on-premises SQL Server workloads to migrate to the right SKU on an Azure VM?
Sure. So as explained before, they can use the Azure SQL Migration extension for that. So let me share my screen really quick again.
Sure.
And in this slide, I am explaining how the process works. So once the SQL Migration extension is installed, within the extension, we have this option to collect performance data from the existing environment. So collecting this data from this environment means that we'll be using the MVs to understand the existing workload, and then it will generate some output files. And these files will contain all this performance data. For later, the SKU recommendation engine is going to analyze the output and provide our customers with recommendations to the right SKU that fits best for the workload. Again, we support all the different targets in Azure SQL, and SQL Server and Azure SQL VM. It's one of the most popular one.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thanks, Logan and Carlos. We got a lot of information today. Now, to learn more about Azure Database Migration Service and the SKUs that are best for the SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines, check out the docs pages and those blog posts that we listed below this video. Well, we'll see you next time on Data Exposed.